Let me now let everyone introduce themselves on panel, and we'll get going.
Okay, I'm Justin Siegel. I'm the president of Boxer Property. Boxer is a privately held commercial real estate company. We own and manage office buildings, hotels, some retail properties. We have a large collaborative space platform. We're based in Houston, and we're operating all over the country. And I also am the CEO of Stemmons Enterprise, which is a company that provides an operations platform for real estate firms.
Hello, I'm Deborah Boyer. I'm the EVP and Director of Innovation and Community Impact for the Swig Company. We're a privately held 80-year-old company based here in San Francisco, and we own commercial real estate, primarily office buildings in California and in Manhattan, and a number of other places sprinkled across the country.
And I'm Alan Benson with Catalyst Research, and we track commercial real estate properties and data across the country. We're tracking about 2.4 million buildings across the country and millions of square feet of space and availability in our proprietary data set.
Let's start thinking a little bit about building data. What are the core value propositions around collecting and using building data? Deborah, maybe you could kick us off on this one.
Big question. When I think about data and the value of data, I have to, maybe given my age and tenure in this business, go back to thinking about how did we think about information in the early days, and really success meant hoarding information and having secret tips about things, and that was your competitive advantage. And now, it's hard to hide, right? Because data is available, it's measurable, it's accessible. And so really now the competitive advantage, I think, has become who has the best analytical tool, and how are they using that, and how are they applying it, and how are they able to tell a really compelling story with that. Building data for us, I think, divides into two sections. One is occupant data, and the other is more operational. So on the occupant data side, we are faced with a time when our business has changed to be a delivery of experience. And so the data that we need is, what are the people in the space responding to? And so all of this information that we're collecting about that is helping drive our decisions about how to evolve that space and that experience. We're sort of living that real time right now with our new platform, H3 Experiences, and seeing through our app that we get instant feedback from tenants, and that helps us evolve our product. And then on the building side, it's about operational efficiencies. One of the biggest things we look at is energy use and cost around that, and carbon footprint issues around that. And again, going back in time, I think about the old days where we did these studies of recommissioning, and the recommendations you would get for a payback sometimes paid off, often didn't. And now we have the ability to so finely measure that our Carbon Lighthouse is a great partner for us, and they come into our buildings and measure. And because the accuracy of their data is so good, they will guarantee their rebate. So there's full transparency around that. So those are just a couple examples of some of the real evolutionary changes I've seen in building and occupant data, I think.
Sure. I mean, I think of it kind of conceptually as if we think about what kind of a problem might occur, like what would be something that we would be sad to see happen in our organization. And then we could take a step back from there and think, what kind of thing would we have done to fix that? And then we think about some very experienced, wonderful person that exists theoretically but is hard to find, and say, what kinds of things would that experienced, awesome person have taken into account in making that decision to prevent that negative outcome? And then we can say, what are the data points that we can capture to help make that decision happen more easily, in a more consistent way. And then we can start using that information to become essentially exception-based and data-driven. So if we were doing that for this conference, we might say, was this a good conference or not? Somebody who's very smart might be sitting here watching how many people are talking to each other, whether people are smiling, whether there's circulation in the room, whether the sponsors have people looking at their things. If we could capture those kinds of data points and then intervene in real time, we might wind up, by the way, this conference is awesome, but then we start thinking about properties, and it's like, well, what's breaking? What are people not using? Where do we have bottlenecks? Where are we spending too much? Where are we having unanticipated issues that come up that we could have predicted? And so that's kind of the general approach that we think about, is what can we capture that will allow us to supercharge the decision-making process and find interventions much earlier in the process instead of waiting until something is very obviously an opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Alan, let's think a little bit about your business, which is very transactional.
Right.
And that's Alan's been providing software solutions to brokers and investors over many years. And how's that evolved over time?
Yeah, I think it leads back into what they were talking about. If you take a look at it, just 5-10 years ago, it all used to be about the transactions. You look at the rent rolls, you figure out what the building's worth, and you buy it. Now it's not like that anymore. It's about, how much money is the building saving on electrical costs. When the buyer goes into these buildings now, they know what their ROI is going to be on day one. In the past, it was just a pretty good guess. The building generated this much revenue. There's a big fluff item in there, but now with all the data that's being collected from the new elevator systems in the buildings, the green building ratings, the value prop on the data collection side of the building itself, not just the people in the building, that's evolved a lot of things. And we always talk about, there's data and there's good data. And in our space, there's tax record data, but then there's data that's been vetted, where you go in and you research and you collect all the information on how many dock high doors, grade level doors, all the detailed information about that building, any rent rolls you can collect on it, the tenant history on the building, what's the turnover in the building, all that information is aggregated to one point. So it goes into two pieces, the people piece and the data matrix piece of the building itself. So it's evolved quite a bit, and it's changing rapidly. So all these data points now are being attached to the properties, and people can quickly make those decisions.
Decision making in the marketplace, how have you seen that evolve? Is it speeding up? What's going on?
Yeah, the transactional rate is pretty dramatic now. We've been pretty fortunate the last 5 years to have this economy that we've had, and we've been seeing those transactions turn, seeing properties on the market for days and closing in 2 months instead of 6 months. So the transactional rate, because the information is there and all the data is there, when they go in to do the due diligence, they lay it out and can close on those properties a lot faster. Tenants can go in and see what tenants in the different markets are looking at rent rates, and they can evaluate and quickly say, okay, this makes sense, it's legit rate, and I can get into the space faster. So that data to decision is where everything's at right now.
When thinking about all the data that will be available in the future, just with more accessible and better tools, what kind of infrastructure do you see that building owners and brokers and other participants in the market need to invest in right now?
Well, I think, talking about the data is great, but as you're giving me a softball here, which I appreciate.
Because you wanted it.
I know. I missed the
We aim
panel
to
prep.
please.
Yeah, I missed the panel prep call, and I was like, ask me about infrastructure. I hope that's okay. So here's the thing that I see is that there's a huge amount of data that's out there, and there's a lot of excitement about what we can do with it. But then we also have to think about are we prepared to house this data? Are we prepared to make sense of it? Do we have the tools and the people in the organization to actually do something with it? Because the only thing worse than making a decision without information is acting and pretending like we're making it on the basis of information, but not really doing so. one of my favorite things that most people just kind of gloss over is to say, let me see your enterprise taxonomy. What is the structure of information that we use to describe the things that happen in this organization? And then what is the system of record? Where does this data live? And then who's the data steward? Who's responsible for this? And can we see your data governance approach? And I think if we decided, for example, that we were going to open a grocery store, we would understand very quickly that we need a building and we need shelves and we need refrigeration and there needs to be a produce manager. But to the extent that we're trying to bring data and data-driven decision-making into an organization and not preparing ourselves by having the right systems, the right philosophy, the right business processes, and if you don't do that, and if you don't hire Moody's, which is your very valid option here, because if you can't plug into a set of resources that knows these things and has a set of tools and has a set of approaches, and we don't develop those things ourselves, then there's a real danger of making decisions in a way where we're pretending but not actually using the information effectively, and that's something that I'm very focused on myself.
I'm going to add to that, because one of the things that we're seeing is it used to be brokers that used to acquire data, but now everybody, the number of our users that are institutional data users, trying to decide how much an earthquake is going to cause damage-wise in a market compared to financial side. When things change, what's my impact? To be able to see the people that are using the granular level data today compared to just a few years ago is amazing. And even the property owners, just people that own random properties that want to know how does it really sit compared to everything else. So that is evolving probably the fastest in our industry right now.
I think there's another evolution, if I can bring us back to the more concrete, that is really an interesting thing to see, is when different kinds of data can be brought together to solve a problem in a new way. And so, my orientation here was to talk about occupant experience and building operations. So this is an example that struck me. We're in the process of building a building at 633 Folsom, and when we were trying to determine what was the skin of this building going to look like, we came up with a system of architecturally attractive shading elements that because the ability to evaluate what exactly was going to happen at every moment of every day throughout the year with the sun coming onto the building, we were able to tweak these shade elements so that there's not just one shade element, but there's 17 different molds, and they work a little bit differently. And so what we were able to do is change the occupant experience, because it allowed us to meet energy codes by having and still have clear glass. So when you sit in your space in that building and you look out, it is as if there's no glass in front of you. And that sense of light and air that tenants so want today, we could deliver because we could demonstrate with all the right data coming together what that looked like. And I think that those kinds of things are really in this very concrete way, very impactful in our business right now.
Yeah. And your car is safe. It won't be melted by the building. Is there any questions from the audience? I'm happy to take 1 or 2 questions if we have a little time. Sure.
You've all touched on it a little bit. I was surprised that there might not be, from a portfolio investment standpoint and risk standpoint, in the role play of, let's say you have a portfolio of 100 assets across the country, and you're trying to anticipate where you have risk over the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years. We're starting to aggregate all this data, but we're not drawing any conclusions. And when you look at what Wall Street can do for 10 or 15 bips and come back literally in short periods of time with all the data that they've collected, we're still in the 3x5 card era of not being able to identify it, and it tends to be mostly proprietary with hours and hours spent. And nobody has yet found the app that can aggregate and then draw at least recommendations, if not conclusions. And I was kind of curious if any of you have touched on it or taken a shot at it.
Yeah, I'll just, real quick, I'll jump on that. One of the things that we see is it used to be data used to sit in databases. You had to move blobs of data across. You look at some of the things that some of the other people in the space are doing now with in the banking industry, financial industry, they're accomplishing or trying to come to that instant decision. Used to be, okay, what's the next 10 years out? Now they're looking what's next quarter out. So that's changing.
So we're dealing with this issue, I would say, very much in real time right now, and there's essentially two components to it. One is, what is information that we have within our own internal data sets, and how can we leverage that? And so we built a model using machine learning, where we pull in disparate data sets from multiple domains, things like their payment history, what industry they're in, work orders, customer satisfaction stuff. I mean, just anything that we can get that relates to the experience. And now we have a prediction score that's running on a machine learning model to predict the likelihood of default, and we roll that up, and weight it by the size of the tenant, and now we can look at our potential outcomes per property. But the next frontier of that is to bring in external data, like your data sets. But also, and we're talking to a major tech company about this, about partnering around this solution to bring in things like, Twitter streams and news articles and, BLS stuff and housing starts and all those kinds of things. The trick is we can't just grab all that stuff and throw it into a pot. Is we have to understand, how do we make a neural network? What does training data look like? How do we validate it? And that's really, I think, the direction that we're going is we need to build basic capabilities about using information, reusable approaches using advanced technologies, and then we can worry about what data we can throw into the mix.
Just a 2-second plug, not for me, but if you go to, I guess it is for me, if you go to commercialexchange.com, pull up a building, there's a Moody's CLS score on that building, and those are being changed all the time. So this is starting to happen pretty dramatically. So.
And I think as some of this evolves more, there's going to be a lot more predictive analytics when we go into looking at acquisitions, and many more things that are going to be considerations as to, is this an asset we want to own or not? And I'm going to kick this back to you, because I think Michael's doing something right now that's incredibly interesting around climate change and evaluating geography around climate change for that.
Yeah. So Moody's this summer made a big move into the ESG or sustainability space. It is a very hot topic across financial institutions across the world. And it is with a view to how their portfolio would evolve over time in the face of different climate change scenarios. The guys who were running this were environmentalists and weathermen, right? Not finance people. So it's very kind of fluid, I would say, at the time, in terms of there aren't really hard metrics. People have different opinions. It's very sort of emotionally driven marketplace right now. But this is very quickly becoming something that is very valid for anyone that holds a portfolio of properties. Not only, regardless of how you think about climate change, for example, the capital rules that the banks have to follow, Basel IV, which is the latest variation of this, includes this. And that is a complete shift from simple rules that we used in the past. So the industry is moving in that direction. We are working on a number of interesting tools in that space. Alan mentioned our commercial location score, and I welcome you guys to come and check it out. We'll be over there doing demos. Thank you very much.